It was a quiet afternoon in the sleepy neighborhood, but the air carried a tension that only those who truly knew the value of life could sense. A baby, no more than a year old, lay in his stroller, his eyes wide and trusting as they gazed up at the world around him. The streets were almost empty, save for a few distant voices and the occasional creak of the trees swaying in the wind. Suddenly, a low growl sliced through the calm, unsettling and raw. The baby's gaze shifted, noticing a figure emerge from behind a dumpster. A German shepherd, its fur matted with dirt, eyes filled with fear yet determination. The baby's fingers twitched as the dog's gaze met his, a moment of pure connection in the chaos. In an instant, the growl turned into an urgent bark, and the dog stood protectively in front of the baby. It wasn't a coincidence. There was a bond unspoken yet undeniable. The dog wasn't just a creature of instinct, it was a protector. The air thickened as danger loomed, and the baby's heart raced. His safety now depended on this stranger in the form of a dog. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet suburban street. The faint hum of a distant lawnmower and the occasional chirp of birds were the only sounds breaking the stillness of the afternoon. The neighborhood was a peaceful one, a place where families and young children played in front yards, and the breeze carried the scent of fresh, cut grass. It was in this serene setting that the most unlikely of bonds was about to begin. A baby, no older than a year, lay contentedly in his stroller on the front porch of a modest home. His little hands grasped the edge of the blanket that had been draped over him, his wide eyes scanning the world around him. The air was warm, but not unbearably so, and the baby seemed at peace, his soft cooing punctuated by the occasional giggle as he reached toward a small butterfly fluttering nearby. His mother, a few feet away, was busy tending to the garden, unaware that her child had caught the attention of a much larger, much more dangerous presence. From the shadows of the alleyway, a pair of eyes watched, unblinking, yet filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The German shepherd had been wandering the streets for days, driven by a primal need to survive. It had no owner, no place to call home. Its ribs were visible beneath its matted fur, a sign of the hunger it had endured over the past few weeks. But there was something different about this house, something that drew the dog in. It wasn't just the scent of food wafting from the kitchen, or the warmth that emanated from the front porch. It was the baby. The dog's keen senses immediately detected the vulnerability of the child, so small, so innocent, so unaware of the dangers that lurked just beyond his reach. The German shepherd stood perfectly still, its body tense but not aggressive. Its eyes followed every movement the baby made, watching intently as the little one giggled and reached for the butterfly. Despite its hunger, despite its own fears, the dog did not move. There was something in the baby's innocence that calmed it, something in the child's trust that made the dog pause. For a long moment, the dog and the baby simply watched each other. The baby, unaware of the world outside his immediate surroundings, locked eyes with the dog, his gaze filled with curiosity but no fear. It was as if the baby instinctively understood that the dog meant him no harm, that this was just another presence in his world, one that he had yet to fully comprehend. His small fingers twitched, as if wanting to reach out and touch the dog, but his body remained still, captivated by the creature before him. The dog, on the other hand, was caught in a moment of decision. Its instincts told it to stay hidden, to remain out of sight, to continue its solitary existence. But for reasons the dog couldn't quite understand, it found itself drawn to the child. The baby's innocence, his vulnerability, triggered something deep inside the German shepherd, a desire to protect, to care for, to ensure that this tiny human remained safe from harm. It wasn't just the baby's helplessness that moved the dog. It was the quiet connection they shared in that moment, a bond forged not through words or actions, but through something far more profound. There was no sound between them, only the unspoken understanding that, in this moment, they were both connected. Two beings from entirely different worlds, yet brought together by something bigger than either of them. The baby made a small noise, a giggle, a laugh that filled the air with a sweetness that seemed to calm the very earth itself. It was a sound that cut through the silence, a joyful sound that made the dog's heart ache, with something it hadn't felt in a long time. longing. The dog's tail, once still and stiff, slowly began to wag, a tentative gesture of acknowledgement of recognition. The dog took a cautious step forward, then another, and another, until it was standing just a few feet away from the stroller. The baby's eyes remained locked on the dog, his expression one of pure wonder. The dog lowered its head slightly, as if offering a silent gesture of friendship. The air between them felt charged with something unspoken, a promise that neither of them could voice but both could feel. And then, the baby reached out, his tiny hand stretched toward the dog, his fingers trembling slightly as they neared the dog's fur. The dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, it lowered its head even further, allowing the baby to touch it, to feel the warmth of its body, to experience the softness of its fur. For a brief moment, there was nothing else in the world but the baby's hand on the dog's head, the gentle pressure of the touch, the shared understanding between them. It was a bond that transcended the need for food, for safety, for anything else. In this moment, they were simply two beings connected by something pure, something that neither words nor circumstances could explain. It was a promise, one that neither the baby nor the dog could fully comprehend, but one that would shape their lives from this point forward. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue across the yard, the baby's mother finally turned her attention toward the porch. She paused for a moment, noticing the dog standing a few feet from the stroller, the baby still reaching out with small, curious hands. For a moment, there was hesitation in the air, a sense of uncertainty. But before she could react, the dog turned, its tail still wagging, and slowly backed away, retreating into the shadows as quietly as it had appeared. The baby let out a soft whine, a gentle cry of protest as the dog disappeared from view. But it was quickly silenced when the baby's mother approached. She scooped him up, holding him close, her arms warm and comforting. She didn't know what had just happened, what connection had passed between her child and the stray dog, but in her heart, she felt a strange sense of peace. The baby, cradled in her arms, looked up at her with his wide, trusting eyes, his small hands still reaching out toward the space where the dog had been. The silent bond had been formed, a bond that neither could fully explain, but one that would change everything. The days that followed were filled with peace, moments of gentle laughter, sunlight pouring through windows, and the soft sounds of life moving in rhythm. The connection between the baby and the dog grew stronger, though it was still subtle, woven into the quiet moments when the child would reach out toward the dog, or when the dog would gently nuzzle the baby's face. Each touch, each interaction, solidified the unspoken bond that had begun to form. The dog, once a stray, had become something far more significant, a protector, a friend, a presence that the baby would come to rely on in ways neither of them yet fully understood. But the peaceful rhythm of their world was not meant to last. It was one of those afternoons when the sun hung lazily in the sky, the breeze warm and inviting, that the quiet was shattered. The baby, now a bit older and more mobile, had begun to crawl and explore. His curiosity had blossomed, and with it, a newfound independence. He would scoot across the floor, investigating every corner of the house, each object a mystery to be uncovered. The dog, ever vigilant, followed him from a distance, watching closely, ensuring that no harm would come to the child. The bond between them had grown, with the dog positioning itself in a way that always kept the baby within its line of sight. But something had changed. The dog, for the first time since their bond had solidified, felt a stir of unease. There was a shift in the air, a subtle change, a heaviness that didn't belong. Its ears twitched, eyes scanning the room with a sharpness that hadn't been there before. The baby, oblivious to the growing tension, giggled as he reached for a colorful toy just beyond his grasp, crawling toward the front door that had been left slightly ajar by mistake. The German shepherd's body tensed as the baby approached the threshold, its instincts kicking in. This was not normal. The door was too close to the outside world, too much danger. The dog growled lowly, its gaze fixed on the baby as it began to push itself up to stand, a wobbly motion that reflected the baby's growing independence. The dog's body moved, instinct pulling it forward, but just as the dog took a step toward the child, the door creaked and the breeze pushed it open wider. The baby, now standing unsteadily. Reached for the doorframe, his small fingers curling around it, as if he were reaching for something just out of his grasp. He had no idea what was outside that door, no understanding of the dangers that lay beyond it. The dog let out a sharp bark, the sound of warning, a cry that carried urgency. The baby's eyes widened in surprise at the sound, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. He took a step forward, his little legs wobbling as he advanced toward the open door. Time seemed to stretch in that moment, each second heavy with the weight of what could happen next. The dog, now fully alert, charged forward, but as it did, the door swung wide open, and the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, echoed through the hallway. The dog froze. The baby, confused, turned toward the sound of the footsteps, his tiny head tilting in curiosity. And that's when it happened. The figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette framed by the late afternoon light. The man was tall, disheveled, his clothes torn and dirty. His eyes were wide, frantic, but there was something else in them. Something predatory. The German shepherd's growl grew louder, its body stiffening, its teeth bared. It was ready. Ready to protect, ready to fight. The man didn't seem to notice the dog at first. His eyes were fixed on the baby, a strange, hungry look in his gaze. The German shepherd, sensing the immediate threat, let out another deep, resonating growl, its stance unwavering. The man's eyes flicked toward the dog, a fleeting moment of hesitation crossing his face before he stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward the baby. The moment was here. The moment the dog had been waiting for. Without warning, the German shepherd lunged, its body moving with a speed and power that only an animal driven by love and protection could possess. The man yelped, stumbling back as the dog's teeth sank into the sleeve of his jacket, pulling him away from the door, away from the baby. The baby, startled, let out a frightened cry, but the dog never took its eyes off the man. The baby, too young to understand the danger, instinctively reached for the dog, his tiny hands reaching out toward the protector he had already come to trust. The man, still trying to fight back, struggled against the dog's grip, but it was no use. The dog was relentless, its protective instinct fully engaged, and it wasn't about to let anything happen to the baby. The dog's growl filled the room, a low, dangerous sound that echoed in the space. The baby's cries had grown louder, more panicked, but even as the tension in the air thickened, the dog did not relent. Finally, the man, realizing he could not overpower the dog, broke free, stumbling backward and out the door. The dog, eyes never leaving him, continued to growl until the man was out of sight, the door slamming shut behind him with a finality that echoed in the silence. The house once again fell still. The dog stood, panting, its body still tense but no longer in motion. Its eyes, once filled with the ferocity of protection, softened as it turned to the baby, who was now sitting on the floor, tears streaming down his face. The German shepherd immediately moved toward him, lowering its head to nuzzle the baby's cheek, the softness of the gesture in stark contrast to the violence of the moment that had just passed. The baby, still frightened, reached out for the dog's fur, his tiny fingers brushing against the dog's coat. The dog nudged him gently, its tongue licking the baby's face in a soothing motion. The bond between them had never been clearer than it was in this moment. The dog had saved the baby, not out of instinct, but out of love, out of the bond they had formed. The baby's cries gradually slowed, and soon the sound of the dog's gentle breathing filled the room, calming both of them. The door had been closed, the danger had passed, but the bond between them was forever altered. They were no longer just two beings who happened to cross paths. They were protectors, partners, bound together by a love and trust that could never be broken. The night after the encounter with the man, the house was quiet again, but the silence felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that settles after a storm has passed, when you know something may be lingering just beneath the surface. The baby slept in his crib, his little body curled up beneath a soft blanket, but his peaceful slumber was a fragile thing, and the German shepherd knew it. The dog had positioned itself in a corner of the room, its eyes ever watchful, ears trained on every creak and groan of the house. There was no trust in sleep, at least, not yet. The dog's senses were sharp as always, and every slight movement outside the house caught its attention. The night felt heavy, like a dark presence was lingering just beyond the safety of their home. The German shepherd's thoughts were consumed with the image of the man's frantic face, the way his eyes had locked onto the baby with that terrible hunger. Something in the dog's gut told it that this wasn't over. The man hadn't just been some random passerby. He was driven by something more dangerous. The baby's cries were sharp in the stillness, and the dog was immediately at the crib, its eyes softening as it saw the baby stir. The baby reached out his small arms, seeking comfort, as if he could feel the weight of the night. The dog nudged the crib gently, and nudging the baby's hand with its nose, offering what little comfort it could in a world that suddenly felt unsafe. The tension was unbearable, and the dog knew that the peace they'd had before was no longer something they could take for granted. It was only a matter of time before the danger outside would come again, and this time, the dog couldn't afford to be caught unprepared. Its job was to protect, not just from the man who had shown up uninvited, but from any threat that could harm the baby. The baby needed to be safe, and that meant they needed to leave. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a prison. In the dim light, the German shepherd made its decision. It padded quietly toward the front door, sniffing the air as it pressed its nose to the wood. The scent of the man was still there, lingering, faint, but unmistakable. The dog's muscles tightened, its instincts bristling. The dog knew the threat wasn't just a one-time incident. They had to move. The baby, the only thing that mattered, needed to be somewhere safer. Somewhere they wouldn't be found. The German shepherd barked softly, a low, urgent sound that seemed to echo through the still night. It was a sound that had no words, only meaning. The dog was not just alerting itself. It was alerting the house, signaling to the baby's mother, who had been sleeping peacefully just down the hall. She awoke immediately, the bark of the dog pulling her from her sleep. Her heart raced as she listened carefully, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She had no reason to be afraid, no immediate danger. But something about the urgency in the dog's bark had her heart pounding. It wasn't like the dog to sound the alarm like this, especially not at this hour. Her eyes flicked toward the baby's room, but the door was closed. She couldn't hear anything unusual. Still, the feeling of dread didn't leave her. She stood up slowly, moving toward the hallway, her footsteps soft but quick. When she reached the baby's door, she cracked it open just enough to see the soft glow from the nightlight casting shadows across the room. The German shepherd was there, standing by the crib, its eyes fixed on her as it backed away from the baby and nudged its head toward the window. There was no time for hesitation. The dog's body language was clear there was danger, and they needed to leave. Now, without another thought, she grabbed the baby from the crib, cradling him against her chest. She could feel the weight of his tiny body, the warmth of his breath against her skin. But even that comfort couldn't ease the growing sense of fear in her heart. Her mind raced, trying to piece together why the dog was so on edge, why it was acting as though there was a danger outside. In the living room, the air was thick with tension. The German shepherd moved to the door again, scratching at the floor with its paw, barking once more. The baby's mother, understanding now that the dog wasn't going to let up, moved swiftly to the coat rack. She grabbed her keys, her hand trembling slightly, but determination in her heart. They had to go. The baby's cries were muffled in her arms as she made her way toward the door. The German shepherd, ever the guardian, stood by her side, ready to protect, ready to lead. It nudged the door open, its ears perked, and its body tense as it stepped outside, its gaze sweeping the yard for any signs of movement. The night air was cool, but it felt too cold now, too uncertain. The dog moved forward, its body low to the ground, eyes scanning the surroundings for any threat. The baby's mother followed, her steps quick but measured, trying to keep the pace with the dog. She was hesitant, unsure of where to go, but she trusted the dog, knew that it had never steered her wrong. They moved quickly down the driveway, away from the house, into the shadows of the trees that lined the street. The baby, though frightened, seemed to calm somewhat in his mother's arms, his little face buried against her shoulder, as if he could sense the urgency in the air. The street, which had been so familiar to her just hours ago, now felt foreign, dangerous. Each step felt as though they were moving away from safety, moving into the unknown. The dog, however, was unwavering. Its senses were honed, its purpose clear. The baby needed protection, and that meant getting out of the neighborhood as fast as possible. They moved swiftly, the dog leading them down a series of back alleys, avoiding the main roads, staying hidden. The baby's mother didn't question the dog's decisions. The way it moved with such purpose told her everything she needed to know. This was no longer just a pet. This was a protector, a guardian, the lifeline her child needed. As they reached the edge of the neighborhood, the German shepherd paused, looking back at the house once more. The danger was still out there lurking. But for now, the baby was safe. They had escaped. And in that moment, as the moon hung high above and the dog stood guard, there was a fleeting sense of peace. It was only temporary, but it was enough. For now, they had outrun the threat, and the bond between them, between the dog, the baby, and the mother, had grown even stronger. The pursuit of safety had begun, and there was no turning back. The cold night air stung as it rushed past, the moon high above casting a silvery glow over the darkened streets. The German shepherd led the way with unwavering determination, its paws patting against the soft earth, carrying its charges, the baby and his mother, far from the place they once called home. The baby's mother held him close, his tiny body curled against her chest, her arms wrapped around him protectively. The sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, felt too loud, too close, as if the world had grown too aware of their presence. As they made their way deeper into the shadows, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the side streets, the baby's mother couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. She didn't know what had triggered the urgency in the dog, didn't know what kind of threat still lurked, but she trusted the German shepherd completely. The dog had shown her nothing but loyalty and bravery since the moment it had entered their lives. Still, the chill that ran through her veins had nothing to do with the cold air. There was something bigger, something far more dangerous, hanging in the air, and she could feel it closing in. The German shepherd, walking ahead, had a purpose in every step. It was like the dog could sense the change in the atmosphere, its movements calculated and deliberate. It moved with the same calm, controlled intensity it had shown when protecting the baby in the house. The dog's eyes darted from one side of the street to the other, scanning every corner, every shadow. It wasn't just watching for potential threats. It was tracking them, waiting for them to make their move. The baby's mother felt a knot of fear tighten in her chest. The dog's vigilance was a warning in itself. They kept moving, walking farther away from the neighborhood that had once felt so safe. The farther they went, the more she felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. She hadn't prepared for this. They hadn't planned for this moment. They were supposed to be safe, together in their home. The dog had changed everything, drawing them into this whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. But even as panic threatened to surge, the dog remained steady. It was unshakable. And that steadiness became the anchor she clung to as they made their way down unfamiliar streets. The path ahead was unclear, but they were not alone. They had each other. And they had the German shepherd. The baby shifted in her arms, his little fingers curling tightly around her jacket, instinctively seeking comfort from her presence. He looked up at her, his wide eyes still filled with confusion and fear. But there was something else there too. Trust. He knew she would keep him safe. He knew the dog would keep them both safe. They walked for what felt like hours, the cold biting at their skin, their breath misting in the air. The city was quiet, its streets empty, its buildings looming like silent sentinels. She kept her focus ahead, not daring to look back, not daring to see if anyone was following them, but the dog's unbroken vigilance kept her moving forward. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew they couldn't stop until they were far from danger. Finally, the dog stopped at the corner of an old, brick building. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, the door hanging off its hinges. The dog sniffed the air, then turned to look back at her. Its eyes seemed to tell her, "This is it. We are safe here." She hesitated for a moment, her mind running through 100 different possibilities. each one more terrifying than the last. But something in the dog's gaze steadied her, and she took a step forward. She entered the building, the dog moving ahead of her, its body low and alert, its movements fluid, as if it had been in this place 100 times before. Inside, the building was dark and cold, the air stale and musty. There was no warmth, no comfort, but it was a shelter. A temporary haven from the unknown that still loomed just outside. The German shepherd circled the room, its nose pressed to the ground, checking every corner for any sign of danger. After a few moments, it seemed satisfied. It lay down near the entrance, its body tense, eyes still scanning the dark. The baby's mother, exhausted from the long walk and the constant weight of fear on her shoulders, sank to the floor. She carefully laid the baby down beside her, his little body curling instinctively into her side. He still seemed so small, so fragile in this vast, unfamiliar world, but as she wrapped her arms around him once more, a sense of relief washed over her. They were safe, for now. The dog, ever watchful, didn't rest. It sat in its spot by the door, its eyes focused on the room. The baby's mother watched the dog, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew, without a doubt, that this animal had saved them. It had kept them safe from the unknown. It had risked its life to protect her child, and now, in this abandoned place, it stood guard, ensuring they were not disturbed. The baby, feeling the comfort of his mother's arms around him, finally began to calm. His cries had slowed, his tiny hands still clinging to her, but his breathing was becoming steadier, more even. The German shepherd's presence, its constant vigilance, had settled the room, providing a sense of calm that had been absent in their world for days. She could feel herself beginning to relax, though the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. But for now, they were safe. They had made it through the night. The dog's growl was barely audible, a low rumble in its chest. The baby's mother stiffened, her senses alert again, as the dog's head snapped toward the entrance. A figure had appeared in the doorway. Her heart stopped. Was it the man from before? But the dog didn't react with the same aggression it had shown before. It was still. Its body remained poised, but not threatening. The figure stepped forward into the dim light, and she could finally make out the silhouette of a woman. Someone unrecognizable, but human, at least. She was older, her face weathered with experience, her eyes sharp but soft, as though she understood what it meant to survive in the shadows. The woman didn't speak. She simply stepped into the room and nodded toward the dog, acknowledging its role as protector. The baby's mother didn't know who this woman was, but the dog seemed to trust her, and that, for now, was enough. The small room in the abandoned building was colder than she had anticipated, but it was a shelter, safe for now. The baby's mother sat on the cold, hard floor with her child cradled in her arms. Her body ached from the journey, the exhaustion from hours of walking with no clear destination weighing on her. The baby had finally fallen asleep, his small body nestled against her chest, and his steady breathing was the only sound that filled the room. The German shepherd had settled nearby, its gaze never straying far from the door, still alert and watchful. It had guarded them through every step of the night, and now, as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the boarded up windows, the dog remained vigilant, steadfast in its duty. The baby's mother allowed herself a moment of peace. Gazing down at the child who had captured her heart from the very first moment she had held him in her arms. The child who had known only the warmth of her love, the comfort of her touch. Now, in this strange and unfamiliar place, that bond felt more fragile than ever. Yet, in the quiet solitude of the moment, she realized that it was not fragile at all. It was stronger than ever, fueled by their shared vulnerability, by the bond they had forged through fear and uncertainty. The German shepherd's low growl broke the stillness, and the baby's mother instinctively stiffened. She had become attuned to the dog's signals, learning to read its every movement, every sound it made. The dog's posture had shifted slightly, its ears perked, eyes narrowing. It was not a threat, but the dog was alert. There was something else in the air. She turned her head toward the door, her eyes searching the shadows beyond, but the doorway remained empty. The woman who had entered earlier, someone the dog seemed to trust, had not spoken since her arrival. Instead, she had simply observed them in silence, her expression unreadable but not unkind. She sat in the corner, seemingly lost in her own thoughts, but her eyes flickered to the baby every now and then, an understanding passing between them. The baby's mother didn't know who this woman was, or where she had come from, but the dog's unbroken watchfulness told her. All she needed to know: this woman was not to be feared. The silence in the room stretched, a kind of stillness that felt both peaceful and unsettling. The German shepherd had calmed somewhat, its growl fading into a low hum of alertness. Its eyes softened slightly, but its ears remained perked, and it did not shift its position. The baby's mother sighed softly and shifted her position, cradling the baby more securely in her arms. She gently rocked him back and forth, soothing him into a deeper sleep. The quiet sound of the baby's breathing was a balm to her tired soul. But even as she sought solace in the moment, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had followed them into this temporary refuge. They were safe, physically, but she couldn't help wondering what other dangers awaited them out there in the unknown. The world had suddenly grown so much bigger, so much more dangerous, and she had no idea where to go next. But as she sat there, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her, she realized something. Something that filled her heart with both awe and gratitude. The dog had been there since the beginning. It had arrived out of nowhere, a stray, an animal with no home, and yet it had chosen to stay. It had protected them from danger, guided them through the night, and now it remained, a silent guardian in this strange place. The bond between them had deepened in ways that words could never describe. It was more than just a connection of necessity, it was a partnership, a mutual trust that had formed between them through shared moments of fear and triumph. The baby's mother reached down, her fingers brushing against the soft fur of the German shepherd. The dog turned its head toward her, its eyes meeting hers with a deep understanding. In that moment she knew. This wasn't just a dog. This was family. This was the lifeline they needed. The one who would never leave them, no matter what. And for the first time since the night they had fled their home, she felt a flicker of hope. The days that followed were slower, more deliberate. They had made their way through the city's back streets and alleyways, avoiding the more populated areas. But now they were hidden in a place that allowed them time to breathe. It was a temporary refuge, a place to rest and gather their strength before deciding what to do next. But more than anything, it was a place for healing, for both the baby and the dog. The baby had finally begun to settle into a semblance of normalcy. Though he had been frightened, confused, and uncertain of the world around him, he seemed to find comfort in the presence of the dog. His tiny fingers would curl around the dog's fur, and the dog would nuzzle him gently, offering what it could: warmth, protection, companionship. In turn, the baby would giggle, a sound of pure joy and innocence that filled the room, a stark contrast to the tension that had clouded their lives just days ago. Each day brought new progress, small victories that slowly chipped away at the fear and uncertainty. The baby began to crawl again, exploring the small, empty room with curiosity. And each time he reached out to touch the dog, the German shepherd responded with patience and care. The connection between them deepened every day, the bond between protector and protected becoming more unbreakable. As for the baby's mother, she spent her days adjusting to this new reality. Her body still ached from the long hours of travel and the constant weight of fear, but there was a renewed sense of purpose in her steps. She had a job to do now. She had to protect her son, to keep him safe, and to find a way to rebuild their lives in this fractured world. But for now, she was content to simply be here, in the quiet presence of the dog and the baby, letting herself heal in the only way she knew how, by leaning into the unspoken love and trust that surrounded her. Each day, as the baby grew stronger, so did the bond between the three of them. The world outside remained uncertain, but within the walls of this old, abandoned building, they had found something they hadn't realized they needed: a family. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the baby's mother allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild their lives, together. The days passed slowly in their new refuge. Each morning, the light that filtered through the cracks in the boarded up windows seemed to promise hope, though it was always tinged with uncertainty. The baby, now more settled, crawled around the small room with increasing confidence, his laughter echoing softly through the abandoned space. His tiny hands grasped anything within reach, an old piece of fabric, a forgotten trinket that had been left behind. The world was a large, mysterious place to him, but it was also full of wonder. Each new discovery, each new movement, was a small triumph of growth. The German shepherd, ever watchful, lay in the corner, its eyes never leaving the baby. The dog was its own sentry, its body poised in a way that spoke of a constant awareness of the world beyond. It had found its purpose here, in this small room, where its charge, the baby, was safe. The dog had become an extension of the baby's own world. Always present, always alert, the foundation on which the baby's world was built. But the quiet peace was deceptive. It wasn't the calm of a safe home. It was the fragile calm of waiting. Waiting for something that was still unknown, yet inevitable. The echoes of the danger they had escaped still lingered in the shadows of her mind. Though they were far from the house where they had once lived, though they had left behind the threat of the man, there was still a lingering fear that the worst was yet to come. The baby's mother knew it too. There were nights when she would lie awake, the soft sound of the baby's breathing beside her, and listen. She would listen for the slightest sound. The distant hum of an engine, the rustle of someone moving nearby, the quiet footsteps of a person she couldn't see but feared nonetheless. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind that rattled the boards on the windows, sent her heart racing. The dog, ever vigilant, would shift, its ears flicking toward the sound, its body taut with tension, mirroring the unease she felt deep within. She could no longer pretend they were safe. They had escaped, yes, but they were still exposed, vulnerable. The world outside the walls of their temporary refuge was still a place of danger. Her instincts told her they couldn't stay here forever. This building, this place that had given them shelter for the moment, was not their home. The reality of their situation was harsh. They had no place to return to, no place to build the life they had once had. The world outside had changed, and she was beginning to understand just how much. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, the baby's mother stood up, her tired eyes scanning the room. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. The dog was tense again, its body coiled like a spring, its eyes fixed on the doorway. It wasn't just the darkness of the night that unnerved her. It was the memories. The faces of the people they had left behind. The questions that had been unanswered. The lingering feeling of dread that clung to her thoughts like a shadow. The man who had threatened them still haunted her mind. What had he wanted? Why had he targeted them? The unsettling idea that this could be the beginning of something more insidious gnawed at her. Was there a reason for his pursuit? Or was it random? Either way, she knew they couldn't stay in this building forever. Their safety, their very survival, depended on getting out of the city, getting away from the life they had known. She stepped toward the door, her hand resting on the knob, the dog following closely behind her, its eyes never leaving her. The baby slept soundly, his small body curled up beneath the blanket, oblivious to the dangers that lingered in the world outside. The mother hesitated, staring at the door as if it could hold the answers to her questions. If she opened it, where would they go? What would they face? The German shepherd growled softly, breaking her reverie. She turned toward the dog, her heart pounding in her chest. The dog's stance was rigid, its eyes focused intently on the space beyond the door. The growl deepened, the vibration in the dog's chest resonating through the stillness of the room. Something was out there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. A sudden, sharp knock on the door shattered the silence. The baby's mother froze, her breath caught in her throat. The dog's growl turned into a full, throated bark, its body trembling with tension. There was no mistaking it now. The danger wasn't just a lingering fear. It was here, at their doorstep. She backed away slowly, her heart racing. She didn't know who was on the other side, but she wasn't ready to find out. The baby was still asleep, unaware of the world outside that threatened their safety. The dog, still on alert, turned its head slightly toward her, as if asking her what to do next. It was ready for action. "Stay quiet," she whispered, though she knew the dog couldn't understand her words. It was more for herself than anything else. She pressed her back against the wall, her fingers tightening around the edge of the doorframe, her mind racing for an escape plan. The building was small. The back door locked from the inside, but there was no guarantee that anyone would know they were here. Could they make it through the night without being found? Could they escape again if they needed to? Another knock, louder this time. Her heart skipped a beat. The knocking was deliberate, slow, almost calculated. Whoever was on the other side of that door knew they were inside. They knew they were trapped. She reached for the baby, her hands shaking as she carefully lifted him from the floor. His little body was warm against her chest, but she could feel his unease as well, as if the air itself was thick with danger. The baby's small hands grasped her shirt as he awoke, his soft cries filling the room. The German shepherd, sensing the shift, moved closer, positioning itself between them and the door. The knock came again, followed by a voice, low, urgent, and unfamiliar. "I know you're in there. Come out. We can make this easy or we can make it hard. Your choice." The words were simple, but the weight of them sent a chill through her. The voice was the same. The man was back. The dog growled again, its stance shifting. The tension in the room thickened, a quiet storm ready to break. The baby's mother knew they couldn't stay here any longer. The echoes of fear had become reality. And now they had to make a choice. The baby's mother froze, clutching her child against her chest, as the voice on the other side of the door echoed through the small room. The German shepherd's growl intensified, vibrating in the air like an ominous warning, and the baby's soft cries, startled and confused, filled the space between the tense moments. The knock came again, louder this time, accompanied by the voice that was now unmistakable. The man had returned. "I know you're in there," he repeated, his voice low and threatening. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Open the door, and we'll talk." The baby's mother swallowed hard, her mind racing with panic. She had no idea who this man was, what he wanted, or why he had targeted them. But one thing was clear: they were no longer safe. The dog's instinct was right. This was not just a random encounter. This man had followed them, and now he had tracked them to their hiding place. They were exposed. The room was dark, save for the faint light filtering through the cracks in the walls. But the darkness seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. It wasn't just the night that pressed in on them. It was the sense of being hunted. The walls of their temporary refuge, which had once offered a small measure of safety, now felt like a trap. The baby's mother turned to the dog, her eyes wide with fear but filled with resolve. There was no more time to hesitate. The dog had already proven its loyalty, its bravery, and its ability to protect. The choice was clear: they had to escape. She crept quietly toward the back of the room, where the door to the alley was, trying not to make a sound. The baby, still half asleep, nestled against her chest, his small hands clutching her tightly, as if sensing the danger in the air. The dog stood firm between her and the door, its body tense, eyes locked on the entrance as if daring anyone to make a move. The voice outside was more insistent now, desperate. "I know you're in there! I saw you come in. There's nowhere to run. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." The baby's mother's heart raced in her chest as she moved toward the back door, but she knew they couldn't afford to be seen. She pressed her back to the wall and whispered, "We'll have to go now." The German shepherd's gaze never left the door, its body vibrating with contained energy. Without a word, it moved toward her, its posture indicating readiness. This was the moment the dog had been preparing for, the moment it had been guarding against. Just as she reached for the back door, she heard the unmistakable sound of the man's footsteps growing closer. A wave of panic surged through her. They were running out of time. The dog's growl softened to a low, urgent bark, and she froze. There was a moment, a split second, where everything seemed to slow. She could hear the baby's quiet, labored breaths against her chest, feel the weight of her fear pushing down on her. But she also felt something else. Something she hadn't felt in days: the warmth of trust, of knowing that the dog would get them through this. The back door was rusted, but it opened with a creak. The baby's mother held her breath, hoping it wouldn't be loud enough to alert the man outside. She turned to the German shepherd, who was still at her side, its eyes focused on the door with unwavering intent. "Stay close," she whispered to the dog. "Stay close and protect him." Without another word, she pushed the door open, stepping cautiously into the alley. The air outside was thick with tension, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the door behind her creaked again. She had to move faster, but the baby's small frame, still clinging to her, slowed her pace. The German Shepherd was at her heels, its body low and alert. It moved with purpose, its keen eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Its growl, though softer now, was a constant reminder that they were not alone. She could feel the weight of the dog's protection, the promise of safety in its presence. As they turned down the narrow alley, the baby's mother's mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. She had no idea where to go, but she knew they couldn't stay in this city any longer. It wasn't safe. But where could they run? Where could they hide? The alley seemed endless, and the distant sound of footsteps behind them reminded her of how little time they had. She could still hear the man's voice faintly, calling out for them to stop. "You can't run forever," his voice echoed, but it didn't stop her. The baby, still clutched in her arms, was silent now, his small body shivering slightly as the cold air bit at his skin. The German Shepherd, sensing the baby's discomfort, nudged the child gently, as though offering reassurance. The dog's presence was a shield, a lifeline in the darkness. But the mother knew that this escape wouldn't last forever. They needed a plan. They needed a place to go. They couldn't just keep running forever. As they neared the end of the alley, she spotted a narrow street leading off to the right, a place she hadn't noticed before. There were shadows, hidden corners, perfect for an escape. She turned toward it without hesitation, the baby's mother trusting the dog's instincts. The dog turned with her, its ears perked, its eyes alert. For a moment, the world around them seemed to quiet, the sound of their footsteps the only noise in the air. The alley behind them was now empty, but she couldn't afford to be complacent. The man was still out there. But as they reached the street, something unexpected happened. The sound of footsteps stopped. The man's voice faded, and a strange silence fell over the alley. The baby's mother stopped in her tracks, the baby still held tightly against her chest. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't see anyone. The alley was dark, but the street beyond was quiet. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Had they lost him? The dog stood still for a moment, its body tense, its ears flicking toward the sound of approaching footsteps. But the noise didn't come. The German Shepherd's posture softened slightly, though it still watched the shadows carefully. It seemed like a brief moment of peace, but only for a fleeting second. The echoes of fear still lingered. The threat still hung in the air. But for now, the mother and her child were safe, hidden for the moment, protected by the dog's vigilance. The dog's eyes met hers, and she understood. This wasn't over yet. But they had made it out, for now. The stillness of the narrow street felt like a false promise, though the German Shepherd's tense posture suggested that they had momentarily escaped danger. The baby's mother could not shake the feeling that the shadows still watched them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves of nearby trees, and the chill in the air nipped at her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was consumed with the sounds of their escape, the echoes of their footsteps, each one sounding too loud in the silence that followed. The baby's soft breathing against her chest was the only comfort she could find in this strange, uncertain world. Her fingers tightened around him, holding him closer, feeling his warmth as a lifeline. She couldn't let herself think of what might have happened if the German Shepherd had not acted as quickly as it had. If it hadn't been there to protect them, what would they have done? What would have happened to her child? The dog, ever the silent sentinel, moved ahead of her. Its body was low to the ground, its eyes scanning every corner of the street, every shadow. It didn't pause for even a moment, its instincts pushing it forward. The dog's focus was absolute. Every step taken with purpose, every movement calculated. The baby's mother had learned quickly that the dog's silence was never an absence of alertness. The dog was always watching, always listening, always on guard. As they moved down the street, the baby's mother realized they had reached a small park, its tall gates now barely visible in the moonlight. The park, empty and desolate, seemed like a safe haven for the time being. A place to pause, catch their breath, and plan their next move. The quiet of the park was a stark contrast to the tension that had been building since their escape. She stopped for a moment, feeling the weight of the night press in on her. The dark outlines of trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. The German shepherd stood at her side, watching the empty street, its tail slightly lowered, but its body still poised for action. The baby stirred in her arms, his little face peeking out from the blanket that had been wrapped around him. His tiny eyes blinked in confusion, still adjusting to the change in the world around him. For the first time in days, he seemed to sense the quiet that had fallen over them, an unnatural silence, thick with anticipation. The baby's mother shifted him gently in her arms, careful not to disturb his fragile sleep. She leaned against a nearby bench, exhaustion pulling at her limbs, but she refused to sit for long. They couldn't afford to stop moving for too long. They had made it out of the immediate danger, but she had no illusions about their safety. It wasn't just the man who posed a threat anymore. It was the uncertainty of their future, the unknown that waited around every corner. And the dog paced back and forth, its movements like a shadow slipping between the dark patches of the park. It wasn't merely searching for threats. It was guarding, ensuring that they weren't followed, that no one would creep up behind them unnoticed. Its sharp eyes flicked toward the baby's mother every so often, ensuring she was still close, still safe. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the German shepherd. The bond between them had deepened in ways she never could have imagined. The dog was not just an animal to her anymore. It was a protector, a partner. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, its dedication to her child unmatched. It had saved them already, and now it was continuing to watch over them, keeping the unknown at bay. She reached down and placed a hand gently on the dog's head, her fingers brushing through the dog's fur. The dog paused for a moment, then turned its head slightly toward her, eyes softening ever so slightly. For a brief moment, they shared a silent understanding. The dog would keep them safe, and in return, she would protect the dog, too. The German shepherd's ears flicked upward, a sudden alertness creeping into its stance. It turned its head toward the darkened path that led deeper into the park, its body going rigid once again. The baby's mother stood, her heart racing. She couldn't see anything in the distance, couldn't hear any signs of movement, but she trusted the dog's instincts. Something was out there. The dog began to move in the direction of the path, its body low and steady. The baby's mother followed closely behind, her heart thumping in her chest. It was in these moments that she felt the weight of her reliance on the dog. There was no room for error, no room for hesitation. The dog was their only source of protection in a world that had become unfamiliar, even dangerous. As they approached the edge of the park, the dog's growl rumbled low, a warning to anyone, or anything, that might be nearby. The baby's mother could feel her breath hitch in her throat. Was it the man again? Had he found them so quickly? No, the voice had been too far away, too distant. It couldn't be him. Suddenly, a figure stepped from behind a tree, a shadow against the moonlight. The dog reacted instantly, its growl escalating into a bark, its body coiled with tension, ready to spring into action. The baby's mother froze, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the figure before her. The person stepped into the light. It wasn't the man. It was a woman, a tall figure, cloaked in a dark jacket with wild, untamed hair. Her eyes were hard, her face a mask of weathered resolve. The woman did not look frightened or surprised to see them. Instead, there was a quiet recognition in her eyes, as if she had been expecting them. The baby's mother stood still, not sure whether to approach, to run, or to hide. The German shepherd's posture had not relaxed, its eyes fixed on the woman with a wariness that spoke volumes. The woman didn't speak at first, only observing the baby's mother and the dog. After a long, tense moment, she spoke in a low, steady voice. "You're not the only ones looking for safety. You can come with me if you want to survive." The baby's mother felt the weight of the woman's words settle over like a blanket. It was a strange invitation, yet it carried with it the promise of something more. Perhaps safety, perhaps hope. But was it worth the risk? Before she could answer, the German shepherd stepped forward, its stance shifting slightly, as if it sensed that the danger of the moment was not immediate. The baby's mother looked at the dog, its stillness, its unflinching loyalty, and she made her decision. She nodded slowly, led the way. The woman didn't wait for any more questions. She simply turned and began walking down the path, her movements deliberate and calm, as if she were accustomed to leading others through the uncertainty of the night. The German shepherd followed her closely, its eyes never leaving her as it moved with a quiet intensity, its ears flicking in every direction. The baby's mother hesitated for only a moment before following suit, her steps tentative but determined. She had no choice now but to trust the woman and her intentions. There was nothing left for her in the city, no safety, no answers, only this strange chance for survival. The park stretched out behind them, a forgotten corner of the city where the shadows seemed to breathe, and every rustle of wind felt like the whisper of something lurking just beyond sight. They walked in silence, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves, and the rhythmic footfalls of the dog, the baby's mother, and the woman who led the way. She still wasn't sure what to think of the stranger, who had appeared from the darkened corner of the park. The woman had made no effort to explain who she was or why she was there. She hadn't even asked who they were or why they were running. It felt like an unspoken agreement. Survival was all that mattered. Trust would come later. The baby's mother adjusted the baby in her arms, the familiar weight of him now more comforting than ever. He had fallen back into a restless sleep, his small body curled against her, but she could feel the weight of the world pressing on her chest. She was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. The danger was still out there, lurking in every dark corner, every forgotten alley. The baby's safety had been her only priority from the start, and it would remain her focus. But the longer they stayed in the unknown, the more she realized how little she knew about the woman in front of them. After walking for several more minutes, they reached a small, nondescript building on the edge of the park. The door was unmarked, blending into the shadows of the night. The woman turned to them, her eyes catching the baby's mother's gaze, as though silently asking her permission to enter. The German shepherd stood still by the door, waiting for the next step, its head tilted slightly, as though reading the situation. The baby's mother felt a moment of hesitation, her fingers tightening around the baby, as if she could protect him from whatever lay beyond that door, with just the strength of her will. She wasn't ready to trust this woman completely, but there was no other choice. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed a place to rest, to heal. She nodded, and the woman opened the door with a slow creak. The smell of old wood and dust wafted through the opening, and the baby's mother could see the dim interior of the building. It looked abandoned, empty, but there was something strange about it, a quiet, settled feeling, as if it had long been a place of refuge for others like her. The woman stepped inside, and the dog followed closely behind. The baby's mother, her heart pounding in her chest, stepped through the door last, her feet crossing the threshold into the unknown. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for a moment, all she could hear was the beating of her own heart. "Sit," the woman said softly, motioning to a faded armchair in the corner of the room. The baby's mother looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The room was sparse, but there was a warmth to it that made her feel, for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, that maybe they were safe. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now, the woman crossed the room and began to tend to a small stove in the corner. The fire crackled gently, casting a warm glow over the room. There was an aura of quiet competence about her. Someone who had survived in this world long enough to know how to make the most of what little was available. She worked quickly, efficiently, without asking any more questions. The baby's mother sat in the chair as instructed, holding her child close, and tried to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. The dog had settled near the door, its eyes still scanning the room, vigilant as ever. It was a quiet sentinel, ensuring that nothing could slip past unnoticed. The baby's mother didn't feel the need to speak. Her body ached, and her mind was clouded with exhaustion. She could feel her eyelids growing heavy, the weight of the day pressing down on her. But she couldn't allow herself to rest, not yet. Not until she knew more about this place, about the woman, and about what came next. After a long silence, the woman spoke again. You and your child are safe here. For now. No one will find you. The baby's mother looked at her, searching her face for any hint of a lie. The woman's eyes were steady, unwavering. She wasn't offering false reassurances. She was simply stating a fact. How do you know that? The baby's mother asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The dog's ears flicked at the question, but the woman did not flinch. I know how to stay hidden, the woman replied. I've been in your shoes before. People like him. She paused, glancing at the dog before continuing. They don't give up easily. But this is my territory, and no one's going to come looking for you here. The words hung in the air like a promise. The baby's mother tried to relax, to let the quiet of the room soothe her, but the storm within her remained. Fear was a constant companion now, a shadow that would follow her wherever she went. She had come to realize that the world she once knew no longer existed. Nothing was certain anymore. The threats were all around them. And no matter how much she tried to shield her child from it, the storm would always find them.
Who are you?
The baby's mother asked, her curiosity growing as the silence between them stretched. The woman's face softened for the first time since they had entered the building. She looked down at the stove for a moment, as if contemplating how much to reveal. I'm someone who understands, she said quietly. I know what it's like to lose everything, to have no choice but to keep moving. But we survive. That's what matters. The baby's mother nodded slowly, her heart still heavy with the uncertainty of it all. She didn't know if she could trust this woman completely, but for now, she had no choice. She had to believe that this was the right path. As the baby's mother sat in the chair, the baby nestled in her arms, and the dog lay at her feet. She realized that while she might not know what tomorrow held, they had made it through today. The storm within her was far from over, but at least, for now, they were safe. And that, she realized, was all that mattered. The warmth of the room was soothing, but it could not fully quell the deep unease gnawing at the back of the baby's mother's mind. She sat in the chair, her body tired but restless, her eyes constantly flicking to the door and back to the dog, who still stood alert in its spot by the entrance. Despite the safe haven the woman had promised, the mother knew that safety, in this world, was a fleeting illusion. Even now, as the fire crackled softly in the corner, she could hear the distant hum of life moving outside, an echo of the danger that might still be lurking just beyond the walls. The baby slept in her arms, his little body warm against hers, but her thoughts were far from peaceful. She kept thinking about the man who had pursued them. The man whose voice she could still hear in her head, echoing with the same menacing tone it had carried the first time he knocked on their door. He wasn't just some random figure. He was part of a bigger threat, part of the world that had turned upside down. She couldn't escape that reality, no matter how far she ran. The woman who had helped them, who had led them here, was seated across the room now, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes distant, lost in thought. She hadn't offered any more explanations since the baby's mother had arrived, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. This woman had lived through similar darkness. She knew what it was like to run, to hide, to trust no one but yourself. She wasn't offering friendship. She was offering survival. The baby's mother had learned by now not to question the stranger's motives too much. In this world, survival often meant trusting the ones who came to your aid, no matter how mysterious or dangerous they might seem. But the lingering doubt remained. Could she trust her? Could she trust this place? The dog's soft growl interrupted her thoughts, its head snapping toward the window. The baby's mother stiffened instinctively, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't used to this kind of silence, this constant tension. She could feel the storm of her own thoughts, mixing with the storm outside, the dark clouds gathering. The woman across the room stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and graceful despite the tension in the air. "They'll be coming for you," she said flatly, as if stating a simple fact. The words hit the baby's mother like a cold splash of water. She didn't need to ask who they were. She knew. "Ooh," the baby's mother asked quietly, trying to steady her breath, to keep her voice from shaking. "The man," the woman replied, her voice calm but serious. "He knows you're here, and he won't stop until he finds you." The words made the air grow colder, the weight of reality pressing down on her chest. The man hadn't been a random figure. He had been following them, stalking them, and now he was getting closer. The idea that he could track them down again filled her with a deep, primal fear. The dog's low growl grew louder, more insistent. The baby's mother looked at the German shepherd, which had become so much more than just an animal to her. It was her protector, her anchor. The dog was the only thing standing between her child and the outside world. Its unwavering loyalty had been her only constant in a world that was anything but certain. "Do you know how long we have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman shook her head, her face hardening with the weight of experience. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but you need to move. Now?" The baby's mother stood abruptly, the sound of her chair scraping against the floor breaking the silence. She looked at the baby in her arms, her gaze lingering on his small, innocent face. She had to protect him. It wasn't just about finding safety for herself anymore. It was about finding a future for her child. A future where he could grow, free from the constant fear that had become their reality. The German shepherd moved toward the door, its ears perked, its body stiff and alert. The baby's mother stepped forward, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, the knowledge that they couldn't stay here any longer. This woman, who had given them shelter, couldn't offer them the kind of future they needed. And the dog, her protector, her partner, wasn't going to let them wait around and be caught. "Come on," the woman said, already moving toward the door. "I have a place where you can rest, but it's not safe here anymore." They stepped into the alley once again, the cold night air biting at their skin. The baby's mother held her child close, wrapping the blanket tighter around him. The dog led the way, its movements swift and fluid, eyes scanning every corner as they moved. The night was dark, the streetlights offering only faint illumination, but there was no question in the dog's mind. They had to keep moving. They walked quickly, the footsteps of the baby's mother light but determined. The woman kept pace behind them, her face set in a mask of quiet determination. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew the urgency of their situation better than anyone. They reached the edge of the park, where the streets stretched out in front of them, empty and dark. The baby's mother could see the road ahead, the streetlights flickering in the distance, but she wasn't sure where they were going. They had no map, no direction. They were just running, driven by a primal instinct to survive. The warmth from the stove seemed to penetrate the chill in the room, and for the first time in what felt like days, the baby's mother allowed herself to relax just a little. She let her back rest against the chair, her arms holding her baby gently as he slept, the soft rise and fall of his chest offering a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The woman, who had introduced herself simply as Cora, moved about the room with a quiet efficiency, as though her world had been made of survival for far too long to be anything but calm in the face of uncertainty. The dog remained near the door, its body low and alert, a constant reminder of the dangers still lurking beyond. The baby's mother had become accustomed to the dog's vigilance, the way its every movement seemed to scan for threats, both near and far. The sense of safety that Cora had promised was a fragile one, but it was all they had for the moment. Cora finally stopped her movement by the stove, wiping her hands on a worn cloth. She turned to face the baby's mother, her eyes hard yet sympathetic. "You've come a long way," she said quietly. "But the danger's not over. We can't stay here long." The baby's mother nodded, her eyes never leaving the dog as it shifted, its gaze piercing the shadows beyond the door. It wasn't just about the man who had been hunting them. There were others in this city, too, people like Cora, people who had been forced to survive by any means necessary. And now, for better or worse, She was in this world, one where nothing was certain, and trust was a currency she could barely afford to spend. Where are we going? The baby's mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to move west," Cora replied. "I have a place far from here. It's not much, but it's safe. For now. I can't promise it'll be forever, but it'll keep us off the radar." The baby's mother's heart sank. She hadn't wanted to leave the city, her home, the place she once called normal, but she had no choice now. There was nothing left for them here. Just endless threats and the shadow of the man who would stop at nothing to find them. The unknown ahead was terrifying, but it was the only way forward. "How far?" she asked, looking up at Cora with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "About 2 days. If we keep moving and avoid the main roads, we should be fine," Cora said. "But we need to leave tonight. There's no time to waste." The urgency in Cora's voice was like a wake-up call. The baby's mother stood up, careful not to disturb her child, and moved to gather what little they had, mostly blankets and the few scraps of food they had managed to scrounge together. The dog followed her, sensing the change in her movements, ready to protect once again. They couldn't stay here any longer than necessary. The world outside was still as dangerous as it had been when they first ran, but now, the possibility of escape lay before them. It felt like a small chance, but it was all they had. As they gathered their things, the baby's mother turned to Cora. "How do you know about the West?" she asked cautiously. "Why do you think it's safe?" Cora hesitated, looking down at the stove as if considering how much to reveal. The moment seemed to stretch out, thick with unspoken words. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. "I didn't always live like this," she began. "I had a family once, a home. But everything changed when the outbreak hit. People turned on each other. The city became a war zone. I had to leave, just like you. And I've been moving ever since. West is the safest route, for now. People who are still left are better, I guess. Less dangerous." Her words were filled with a quiet sorrow, a grief that mirrored the weight of everything the baby's mother had lost. She could understand that feeling all too well. But it wasn't just grief that made her pause. It was the hesitation in Cora's voice. Something wasn't being said. There was more to this place, more to the West, than Cora was willing to share. And for the first time, the baby's mother felt a flicker of doubt. The woman seemed to notice her gaze. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said quickly. "It's just, the road's dangerous. But if you stay here, it'll only be a matter of time before you're found." The baby's mother nodded, trying to shake the unease settling in her stomach. She had no choice but to trust Cora, for now. There were no better options, no safer place. And whatever dangers the road ahead held, she would face them with her child and her dog at her side. The baby's mother picked up her child once again, cradling him carefully as she prepared to leave. The dog followed at her side, its body taut and ready for action. As they moved toward the door, the sounds of the night felt different now. The wind rustled through the trees, and the distant hum of the city still felt like a distant threat, a reminder that they weren't truly free yet. But the dog, with its steady presence, helped her push away the lingering fear. "Stay close," Cora said, holding open the door. "And move quickly. We'll make it. But we have to be smart. The city's no place for us anymore." The baby's mother followed her out into the night, her breath catching in the cool air as she stepped into the unknown once more. The world was dark, and the way ahead seemed uncertain. But they were moving forward, away from the city, away from the people who hunted them. And that was all that mattered. The night air was crisp, biting. As they moved quickly through the narrow streets, the soft shuffle of their footsteps, barely audible against the hum of the distant city. The baby's mother held her child close, her breath shallow in the cold. Her thoughts a whirlwind of everything that had led them here, and everything that lay ahead. The darkness felt heavy, as though it could swallow them whole at any moment. But there was no turning back now. The German shepherd walked ahead, its eyes scanning every corner, its body moving with a quiet urgency. The dog's growl was low but constant, warning the mother to stay alert. The animal's presence was a shield. but even that couldn't completely ward off the unease creeping into the baby's mother's heart. They had left the relative safety of the abandoned building, stepping into the uncertainty of the night, with no destination in sight beyond the promise of a place Cora spoke of. A place in the West where they could start again, or so Cora claimed. The West was supposed to be safer, a region untouched by the chaos and violence that had consumed the city. But the mother couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too uncertain. She glanced at Cora, who walked ahead with purpose, her figure a shadow in the night. Cora's face was unreadable as usual, but the baby's mother sensed something more behind her actions, something hidden beneath her confidence. Cora hadn't shared much about herself, only that she had been through this before, that she knew how to survive. But that was the thing about survival. It wasn't just about knowing how to stay alive. It was about knowing who you could trust. And the baby's mother was starting to realize that trusting anyone in this new world was the hardest thing of all. Cora turned briefly, noticing the hesitant look in the baby's mother's eyes. "Keep moving," she urged softly, her voice steady, although her eyes flickered with something darker for a moment. "We're almost there." Her words, though meant to reassure, didn't have the effect she intended. The baby's mother felt a shiver crawl up her spine. They had been walking for over an hour, and she could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her. The baby, still in her arms, had fallen into an uneasy sleep, his small body warm against hers. He trusted her to keep him safe, just as he trusted the dog to watch over them. But what if she failed him? What if they couldn't find the safety they so desperately needed? The German shepherd stopped suddenly, its body stiffening. The baby's mother froze in place, her heart racing. The dog's ears were cocked, its gaze fixed on something ahead in the shadows. Cora, too, had stopped and was looking intently ahead. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. "What is it?" the baby's mother whispered, though she knew it was unnecessary. The dog's growl told her everything she needed to know. "There's someone, up ahead," Cora said, her voice barely audible. Her hand instinctively reached for something at her side, but the baby's mother couldn't see what it was in the dim light. The dog, still alert, took a step forward, its muscles coiled, ready to spring into action if needed. The baby's mother's grip on the child tightened, the small sound of his breath still steady against her chest, as if he, too, sensed the shift in the air. For a moment, everything felt suspended. Time seemed to stretch. Every creak, every rustle amplified in the stillness, and then, from the shadows ahead, a figure emerged. It was a man, a tall, gaunt figure, moving with a slow, deliberate pace, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a weathered hat. The baby's mother instinctively stepped back, the weight of her child still firm in her arms. She knew nothing of this man, and that was enough to make her wary. The tension in the air thickened, the low growl of the German shepherd rising as the man approached. Cora did not move. She merely stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "Were you?" she asked, her voice cold but steady. The man's lips curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. "You've made a lot of noise for someone trying to stay out of sight," he said, his voice gravelly, as though he hadn't spoken in days. Cora's stance remained unshaken. "We've been moving quietly enough. We're not looking for trouble." The man chuckled lowly, and the sound carried a coldness that sent a chill down the baby's mother's spine. "Trouble finds people like you," he said, his eyes flicking toward the baby's mother. "You don't know who's really watching." The baby's mother held her breath, her fingers clutching the baby even tighter. The dog remained a silent sentinel, its body rigid, its focus on the man as though it was deciding whether to strike or wait. "Who are you?" Cora asked again, her tone sharper this time. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his boots scraping against the gravel underfoot. "I'm just a traveler," he said at last, his smile widening. "Like everyone else. But I've been around long enough to know that you don't trust anyone who tells you they know the way." Cora's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" The man's smile faltered slightly, and for a moment, he seemed to be calculating something in his head. "I don't want anything. But you'd be foolish to think that little dog of yours can keep you safe from everyone. The German shepherd growled again, louder this time, its teeth visible in the dim light. The man flinched slightly but did not retreat. The baby's mother felt her heart pounding. She could sense the danger, the uncertainty of the situation closing in around them. There was no telling if this man had ill intentions, or if he was simply a scavenger trying to survive. But she wasn't willing to take chances. "You're right," she said, her voice low but firm. "We're not here to make enemies, but we're not trusting strangers either." Cora took a small step toward the man, her gaze sharp. "We don't have time for this. If you're just passing through, keep moving." The man's eyes flickered briefly to Cora, then back to the baby's mother. His smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. He stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Fine," he said, voice tinged with mockery. "You don't have to trust me. Just remember, the road's dangerous, and it doesn't care if you're ready or not." With a last lingering glance at the dog, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had come. The silence that followed felt almost deafening. The tension in the air was palpable, and the baby's mother could feel her heart still racing, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She waited for a moment before turning to Cora, her voice trembling slightly. "Was that?" Cora gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Another threat," she said quietly. "But one we've survived." The German shepherd's growl faded, and the dog returned to its position at their side. Its presence was an anchor, steadying her in the midst of this whirlwind of uncertainty. The baby's mother took a deep breath, still holding the baby close. "We can't keep running from everything." Cora gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "No. But for now, we keep moving, and hope we're one step ahead." They continued walking, the road ahead still uncertain, but their steps now more purposeful. In the silence that followed the encounter, the baby's mother couldn't help but feel the weight of Cora's words. Hope was all they had left, and she was clinging to it, even as the storm continued to churn inside her. The encounter with the man, brief as it had been, lingered in the air like an unshakable weight. The baby's mother couldn't rid herself of the unease that had settled deep within her. The man's words, "The road's dangerous, and it doesn't care if you're ready or not," echoed in her mind, replaying like a warning that would not be ignored. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about knowing how to survive and, more importantly, who to trust. The encounter was a reminder that the world had become a place where survival often meant the sacrifice of something far more valuable. Trust. Humanity, even innocence. But still, they walked. The night seemed longer than it should have been. The baby's mother had stopped asking questions, knowing that Cora wouldn't share any more than she was willing. Cora was a woman hardened by experience, her trust likely as guarded as the city's walls. But the baby's mother had no choice but to rely on her for now. Every step forward brought them closer to safety, or at least the hope of it. The moon hung high above them, casting an eerie glow across the empty streets. The path they followed was narrow, with towering buildings on either side, the streets winding like a maze. It felt like they were moving through a forgotten city, one that had been abandoned long ago. There were no lights, no sounds of life, only the soft padding of their footsteps against the cracked pavement, the steady rhythm of the dog's tail brushing against the ground as it walked alongside them. The German shepherd remained alert, its body tense, every sense attuned to the surroundings. The baby's mother, too, remained alert, her senses heightened in the stillness of the night. They had moved into a part of the city she didn't recognize, an area that seemed darker, even more deserted than the rest. The buildings were crumbling, their windows shattered, their doors hanging ajar as though the city had been slowly dying for years. They had been walking for hours now, the dog leading the way with unwavering confidence. The baby's mother's legs ached from the long journey, but there was no time to stop. Every corner they turned, every alley they passed, felt more dangerous than the last. The baby, still sleeping in her arms, seemed to sense the urgency, his small body twitching occasionally, as though picking up on the quiet tension that hummed in the air. Cora turned to her suddenly, her expression unreadable. "We're close," she said, her voice a low whisper. Close to what? The baby's mother asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. Close to where we need to be, Cora replied cryptically. But we need to be careful. We're not the only ones who know this place. The words sent a chill down the baby's mother's spine. How many others were out there? How many other survivors were moving through this broken world, desperate for a chance at safety? And how many would stop at nothing to get it? Just as she was about to ask more, the German shepherd stopped, its body tense, ears perked, nose twitching. The baby's mother immediately froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The dog's growl was low but unmistakable. There was someone else nearby. She felt a shiver crawl up her spine, and her grip on the baby tightened. Her instincts told her they were not alone. Cora immediately held up her hand, signaling for them to stop. She turned to the baby's mother, her voice low and urgent. Get behind me. Quietly. Now. Without thinking, the baby's mother complied, her body moving as if it were on autopilot. She slipped behind Cora, the baby still cradled in her arms, holding him close against her chest. She could feel the warmth of his tiny body, but even that comfort couldn't suppress the fear rising within her. The dog, sensing her growing unease, moved closer to her side, its presence a silent promise of protection. It was a strange thing, to be so deeply comforted by an animal's unwavering loyalty. But in this world, the dog was her only anchor. For what felt like an eternity, they stood in the shadows, motionless, waiting. Every sound was amplified. The rustling of wind through the trees, the distant hum of a city that never fully slept, the soft shuffle of their breath as they stood in perfect silence. Then, a figure appeared out of the shadows. A man, tall and broad-shouldered. His movements slow and deliberate. He was dressed in tattered clothing, the remnants of a life long lost. But there was an air of confidence about him. Something that suggested he had survived through sheer force of will. The German shepherd growled again, this time louder, a clear warning that the man was too close for comfort. Cora didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her stance firm, eyes fixed on the man. Who are you? She asked, her voice steady but filled with a sharp edge. The man stopped a few feet away, sizing them up with cold, calculating eyes. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his gaze flickering to the baby's mother before returning to Cora. You're in my territory now, he said flatly. I don't take kindly to strangers. The baby's mother's pulse quickened. This man wasn't just another survivor. He was someone with power, someone who had carved out a space for himself in this chaotic world. But there was something more in his voice. A quiet menace, an unspoken threat that sent a jolt of fear through her. The German shepherd's growl grew louder, a low rumble in the back of its throat, and the man flinched for the briefest of moments. It was enough. Cora took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. We're not looking for trouble, she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable warning. We just need to pass through? The man's lips curled into a half smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Nobody just passes through? Not here. Not anymore. The tension in the air thickened, and the baby's mother could feel the weight of the moment settle over her. She could see the dog's body taut with readiness, waiting for Cora's command, prepared to protect. She didn't know what this man wanted, but there was one thing she knew for sure: this was a moment of reckoning. A moment where everything could change. Without warning, the man lunged forward, his hand reaching for something at his side. The German shepherd reacted instantly, leaping into action with a speed that left no room for hesitation. The dog snarled, its teeth bared, ready to strike if needed. The baby's mother instinctively stepped back, clutching the baby to her chest, but Cora was already there, her hand outstretched to stop the dog's advance. Enough, Cora commanded, her voice commanding, sharp as steel. The dog hesitated, though its body was still tense, ready to spring into action. The man, though slightly taken aback by the dog's response, didn't seem scared. Instead, he just chuckled darkly, his hand still hovering at his side. You'll regret walking into my territory, he muttered under his breath. This place doesn't let anyone go without paying. The baby's mother felt a cold sweat form on her brow. This was a moment of reckoning, indeed, but whether it was a moment of survival or sacrifice, she couldn't yet tell. Cora, her eyes unwavering, spoke one last time. We don't need to be enemies. But we won't be your prey, either. The man stared at them for a long moment, the silence stretching longer than it should have. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, he took a step back, his eyes dark with some silent promise. You'll find out what I mean soon enough, he said, his voice a low growl. No one's safe out here. Not even you. Without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving them standing in the eerie stillness of the night. Cora let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned to the baby's mother, her expression unreadable but serious. Let's go.
This way.
The baby's mother nodded, her pulse still racing from the encounter. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. Nothing in this world was certain anymore. The only thing they could rely on was each other, and the unspoken promise that the dog would always be there, ready to protect, ready to fight for their survival. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke, a stifling presence that seemed to swallow the night whole. The baby's mother could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her chest as she followed Cora through the narrow alleyways. The dim glow of the city's faint lights casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked pavement. Her steps were slow and cautious, as though she were walking through a dream. A nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. The tension in her muscles had yet to ease, not since the encounter with the man who had called this place his territory. His words still haunted her. No one's safe out here. Not even you. She could still see his dark eyes, the glint of danger in them, and the ominous way he'd retreated into the shadows after the standoff. The baby's mother had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just an isolated threat. It was part of something bigger, something more dangerous that she had yet to fully understand. Cora led the way, her movements deliberate, her body tense and alert. The German shepherd walked silently at her side, its posture unwavering, as though it too sensed the danger lurking just beyond their reach. The dog's eyes scanned the dark corners of the alley, its ears flicking at every sound, every rustle in the distance. It was a silent protector, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. The baby's mother glanced down at her child, still nestled in her arms, his small body curled against her, his breathing soft but steady. He had been quiet since they left the abandoned building, his little hands clutching her shirt, as though he knew that the world outside had become far more dangerous than it had ever been before. She tightened her grip on him, as though her arms alone could protect him from whatever was to come. They had been walking for what felt like hours, the streets increasingly desolate as they moved deeper into the city. The night felt oppressive, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The city had become a maze, a place where the rules had shifted, where survival meant constantly moving, constantly staying one step ahead. Cora stopped abruptly, raising a hand to signal that they should halt. The German shepherd immediately moved to her side, its eyes trained on the shadows ahead. The baby's mother held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. It was like the calm before a storm. Everything was still, but something was about to break. What is it? The baby's mother whispered, though she could already sense the answer. Stay low, Cora instructed quietly, her voice steady but filled with urgency. She glanced back at the baby's mother, her eyes sharp. There's a fire up ahead. I need to get us through it. The baby's mother's stomach tightened at the words. A fire. They were getting closer to whatever lay beyond this city. Closer to a place that might hold some measure of safety, or perhaps even more danger. There had been rumors of it, stories she'd heard whispered in the shadows, but hearing it aloud made the reality feel even more overwhelming. A distant crackling sound reached her ears, and she could feel the heat from the fire long before she saw it. The flames danced in the distance, flickering through the haze of smoke that now filled the streets. It wasn't just a small fire. It was a blaze, too large to be contained, too fierce to be ignored. The German shepherd growled, its posture stiffening again as it stood between them and the path ahead, ready to lead the way. Cora, too, stood still for a moment, assessing the situation. They're not far off, Cora muttered, mostly to herself, her voice thick with the realization of what was coming. The fire's a diversion. We need to move. The baby's mother didn't have time to ask more questions. Cora was already moving, the German shepherd close behind. Without thinking, the baby's mother followed, her feet moving as quickly as they could. The flames were growing closer now, licking the buildings that stood on either side of the street, casting an eerie orange glow over the night. The baby's mother could feel the heat from the fire on her skin, the smoke stinging her eyes, but there was no turning back. She had to keep moving. The path ahead was blocked by debris, broken windows, charred remnants of whatever had once stood there. The fire was out of control. But the worst part wasn't the blaze itself. It was the crowd gathering in the shadows, the survivors who used the chaos of the fire to their advantage. "Stay close," Cora hissed, her voice urgent, her steps growing faster as they approached the heart of the fire. The German shepherd moved in front of them, leading them toward an alley that appeared to be their only escape from the growing danger. The alley was narrow, the walls too close, the air too thick. The baby's mother felt the weight of the smoke in her lungs as she struggled to breathe. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The dog led them through the shadows, its steps sure and fast, as though it knew the way better than they did. They turned the corner just as the firelight flickered brightly behind them, casting their shadows long and distorted in the alley. The crackle of flames filled the air, but it was the sounds of the crowd, shouting, desperate voices, that reached her ears next. There were people out there, survivors like them, but more desperate, more willing to take anything they could in the chaos. As they reached the end of the alley, Cora stopped, pulling them into the shadows as the baby's mother caught her breath. She could feel the baby shifting slightly in her arms, still unaware of the perilousness of their situation. "We're almost there?" Cora whispered, her eyes flicking nervously toward the growing fire and the encroaching crowd. "But it's not just the fire we need to worry about. They know we're here now, and they won't let us go so easily." The baby's mother swallowed hard, her grip on her child tightening. The path ahead was uncertain, and the fire was just the beginning. The fear in the air was palpable, but it wasn't just the fire that threatened them. It was the people, too. Those who had lost everything, who would stop at nothing to survive. Cora's hand moved toward the small pack she had been carrying. "We need to keep moving. There's no time left." The German shepherd stood in front of them again, its body poised for action, its eyes scanning the dark streets. It was more than just a guard dog now. It was a partner, a companion in this world where survival meant sacrificing comfort, sacrificing trust. They couldn't stay hidden forever. They couldn't avoid the chaos. But for now, they had a brief moment of safety. A brief moment before the fire, and the people it had attracted could catch up. And in that moment, as the baby's mother looked down at her child, she realized something. In this world of uncertainty, in this world of sacrifice and loss, the only thing that truly mattered was survival. For her son, for herself, and for the dog who had saved them all.